Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Thank you. Yes, you can be the caretaker today.
I'll be the bouncer. I'm going to be the bouncer.
Until we have fudge again, you can carry on.
Yeah. Where's the fudge?
Okay, right. This map is showing roughly, 48,000 to 3,000 BC is the areas where are the brown, where there's evidence that people visited those areas, okay? And then the yellow areas are coming a bit closer, 3,000 to 1,200 BC. And we know that Adam would have been around roughly 4,000 BC, okay? So those brown areas, if we imagine that Adam was around 4,000 BC, that is certainly within his lifetime and his genealogy. And then the flood would have been around 2,500, 2348 BC, okay? Now, the Iberian Peninsula is what this area is known as. It's basically Spain and Portugal. It's known as the Iberian Peninsula. This next one is Ebernia or Hibernia on an ancient map, and it's basically a map of Ireland. It's not the most accurate map of Ireland. As you can see, it's rather straight on one side. But Hibernia we usually associate with Scotland. But if you look up a map of Hibernia, you'll actually see that Ireland was also known as Ibernia. So it's not just to do with Scotland. So there was something else going on here. This was the map I mentioned yesterday of Ireland's history around 100 AD. And you've got Eber's half is the lower half and Herman's half is the top half. Now this same word, Ibernia, Hibernia, Ibernia, Eber, is all related to this name Eber, which is the Hebrew word for to cross over. It means to cross over. But Hermon, yeah. Hermon would have been a brother, yeah. But also Eber is also the Hebrew word for the feathers that a bird needs to take flight. Like if you've ever kept chickens, you actually trim off the longer feathers, which are the ones that they need in order to take up off the ground. Right. Yeah. So there's something interesting going on that this word Eber keeps appearing over and over again. So we've got Eber, Ibernia, Hibernia. Eber means to cross over in Hebrew, and Abraham is derived from Eber. It comes from, that's the root of his word. His calling was to leave Ur in the Chaldees and to cross over. He crossed over, and then that was the heritage, and the word Hebrew describes the people who crossed over into the promised land. So even the word Hebrew comes from this root Eber. They were the ones who crossed over. Now some of you probably will be familiar with this, some of you won't, but it's trying to bring you all up to the same level where you've got this. And then we've got the British Isles. British Isles, Roman Britain wasn't just Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England, but it was at one time, basically the Isles were the left and the right hand side. You've got Great Britain and Lesser Britain on the left, which is what we know now known as Ireland. Now a throwaway comment is ish doesn't mean very much. It's a bit vague. So we talk about, well, we'll have lunch at 1-ish. But ish actually means people or man. So I heard whenever I understood very quickly that who was Gary's wife, whenever she said ish, ishi to him, my husband. So it can mean husband or it can mean man. Thank you, that's a lot better. And Isha is wife. Yeah. But ish, there are only certain countries which have ish. You've got Swede ish, Finn ish, Brit ish. I believe that at one time it would have been well-ish, along with Irish, Scottish and English, and it became shortened to Welsh rather than saying Wellish. Yeah. So here we have ish is man or people or husband. Berit is the Hebrew word for a covenant. So Berit ish was the people of the covenant. And I have no difficulty in accepting that there was something special about these lands. I believe other countries were also very special, but I do think that these two countries would have been populated fairly quickly, because when you think about when people were exiled from Israel, if they came out through, I'll show you another map later, well, I'll show you this next map. Yeah, if you think of the Mediterranean and where Israel is, if you were basically on a boat, you would have
Where's your
flown.
pointer?
Sorry? Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, just squeeze it with the
Yeah,
finger and
yeah.
shoot the screen.
If you're coming out from around here, coming on out and floating out through the water, you either would have kind of gone on out this direction and you would have been extremely fortunate if you'd reached America.
Without hitting an iceberg.
Yeah, but then if you come up here, if you're wanting to avoid land masses, because land masses you're always having to look over your shoulder to see who's going to attack you. But islands are extremely attractive because you can get a high point along the coast and you can see where the enemy's coming from. You could get a high point around here, see where the enemy's coming, and again here. So it kind of makes an awful lot of sense that these would be the areas that the people would populate. Sorry?
Oh, I said a natural castle.
Yes, absolutely.
For the water.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that there is pure DNA of the lost tribes throughout Ireland, but these areas were well established Hebrew territories. And during the Babylonian exile, the tribes would almost certainly have fled to these islands, because if you think that there's evidence here that of people living around, like say 5,000 to 3,000 BC, then there already would have been people living and building houses. And then even if you take the flood, there may well still have been properties there that were attractive and people would have known, well, they had houses on high ground. Whenever they came out later, they would have thought, right, let's go and see if there's anything still standing there. They would have been at least familiar that these islands existed and that they had been living on them. Now, I know a lot of what I'm saying is speculation, but I don't think it's that difficult when there's proof that people were living in these areas and they would have been attractive if you were being held captivity down here and you didn't. Well, some people would have moved up around here around the Caspian Sea, but certainly it makes a lot of sense of why there is evidence of people living here during this time period. Okay, so lost sheep is something that I just find fascinating. Jesus spoke about lost sheep. And what do we know about the lost sheep? Basically, we know there was 100 sheep, but one was lost. The shepherd left the 99 sheep and went to find that which was lost. And the lost sheep was important. Now we know that. Does anybody off the top of their head know what the Hebrew word for lost is? It's actually a word that whenever I say to you about it and explain to you how it came about, it will make a lot of sense, okay? It's
not low. Is it low?
No, it's actually abad, which is to perish, okay? It's the,
Abaddon.
sorry?
Abaddon.
Yes,
Hebrew.
yes, yeah. So we have here the letter Aleph. The Aleph is the letter that means from yesterday, power outside of ourselves, strength. It's a reference often to God, but Aleph is the supreme power, okay? Beit is the letter that means house, home, or tent. So Aleph Beit, Av or Ab, is the Hebrew word for father, okay? A dalet is a doorway. So a doorway away from the father is a doorway where you're going to perish, okay? If you leave the family home, take the doorway out, then you will perish, not in the sense of going to hell or hellfire or any of these sort of things. It's just the fact that you will perish in a wilderness if you forget where your home is, if you forget where the father is, if you forget where the strength is of the home. Because it's when you go and wander astray, that's when you perish. Okay? So it's lost is basically taking an opportunity to move away from the father. And in biblical times, as I say, you perished when you wandered away from the family home. Aleph, the strength, the head, the chief. Beit, the home, the tent. And Daleth is a doorway away from that. And that's the meaning of abad, to perish. Okay, so lost sheep are mentioned in Psalm 119, verse 176. I have wandered about like a lost or perishing sheep. Search for your servant, for I do not forget your commandments. That's actually the last verse of the longest chapter in the Psalms. David basically said that. And then Jeremiah, look at Jeremiah 50, verse 6. My people have become lost sheep. Their shepherds have led them astray. They have made them turn aside on the mountains. They have gone from mountain to hill. They have forgotten their resting place. Lost sheep always refers to Yah's people. the 12 tribes who entered the promised land, but then because of exile and because of people taking them captive and taking them off to Babylon, they basically became lost, perishing, because those who could escape escaped, and anywhere was better than living in exile. Another one from Zechariah 10 verse 2, for the household idols speak deception, and the diviners see an illusion and tell deceitful dreams. They comfort in vain, therefore the people wander, or they wander like sheep. They are wretched because there is no shepherd. Now, Matthew 15 verses 21 to 24, we find the faith of a Canaanite woman. Yeshua went away from there and withdrew into the region of Tyre and Sidon. And Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry, saying, have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. But he did not answer her with even a word. And his disciples came up and urged him, saying, send her away, because she keeps shouting at us.
Rich.
But he answered and said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Matthew 10 verses 1 to 6, the 12 disciples' instructions for service. Yeshua summoned his 12 disciples. Basically, it says he summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every sickness. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. The first, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, and James the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthias, the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus. Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, the one who also betrayed him. These 12 Yeshua sent out after instructing them, saying, do not go on a road to Gentiles, and do not enter a city of Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Ezekiel 34 verse 8. As I live, declares the Lord God, certainly because my flock has become plunder, and my flock has become food for all the animals of the field for lack of a shepherd. And my shepherds did not search for my flock, but rather the shepherds fed themselves and did not feed my flock. And then we come to 1 Peter 2 verses 4 to 9 as living stones, and coming to him as to a living stone, which has been rejected by people, but is choice and precious in the sight of God. You also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices that are acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For this is contained in Scripture, behold, I am laying in Zion a choice stone, a precious cornerstone, and the one who believes in him will not be put to shame. This precious value then is for you who believe, but for unbelievers, a stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offence. For they stumble because they are disobedient to the word, and to this they were also appointed. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for Yah's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvellous light. For you once were not a people, but now you are the people of Yah. You had not received chesed, but now you have received chesed. For you were continually straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. Okay. Now, if we look at Matthew chapter 13, we have the parables of the sower, then the weeds, then the mustard seed and the yeast, and the hidden treasure and pearl. And then we have the fact that a prophet is without honour. And then chapter 14, John the Baptist was beheaded. We have the feeding of the 5,000, Yeshua walking on water. And then Matthew 15, the faith of the Canaanite woman. And then Jesus feeds the 4,000. Now there's an awful lot of people out there who actually think that it was just the same story, just told in slightly different ways. But in Matthew tells it twice, both the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. So they were definitely two separate events. And I want to just compare the feeding of the 5,000 with the feeding of the 4,000 for a few minutes. Where did the feeding of the 5,000 take place? Sorry?
Galilee.
Galilee, yes. Yep, at the Sermon on the Mount. It would have been there. Yeah, okay. So we've got Northwest Galilee, Bethsaida, and then we've got the Decapolis in Southeast Galilee was the feeding of the 4,000. Now, do you know what Bethsaida means?
House of, I
Dates.
forgot.
The crushing, is it dates or?
It's actually house of. It's actually house of the fish.
Yeah.
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 Yes. So we've got the bread of life who was born in Beit Lechem, the house of bread, who was basically here at the house of the fish. And you have here the feeding of the 5,000 with the bread and the fish all coming together.
Like you fishes of men.
Yeah, exactly. We have at the sermon, you have the 5 books of Torah and the 2 tablets of the law, adding up to 7. Sorry, I'm moving on to now. Decapolis is basically Greek for is it 10 cities? Yeah, 10 cities. Okay, so the 5,000 was addressed to the Hebrew people, the Jews. The 4,000 was addressed to the Gentiles. One was 5,000, the other there was 4,000. Usually this on my lap just so I can make sure that I might lift this so I don't tell you things out of order.
You want to put the laptop on the drum?
I'll be fine here, thank you. We'll warm the lap up, okay? Now, the 5 books of Torah and the 2 tablets of the law add up to 7.
Sorry, when you say that add up to 7, what does that mean?
No, I'm just thinking. No, I'm going to add it. I'll come to that in a second. I'll come to that in a second. I'm realizing I'm jumping ahead of myself. Okay, right. The 5,000 they sat in groups of 50, which is what they were instructed to do by Moshe's father-in-law. Okay, so that would have made sense to them that they were basically at the Sermon on the Mount. It was like Moshe on Mount Sinai, revealing the new law,
yes,
revealing it, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, but the people had to go in groups. There was order. In fact, I think it's an interesting thing that there is always administration before a miracle occurs. And I think that is good. There has to be order of some sort. And we don't tend to like order. We like the freedom of the Spirit. But when you actually have order, it creates an atmosphere where God can work and not be operating in chaos. What were you going to say?
And this 50 is right throughout the whole of the Zadok calendar.
Yes.
Right through it.
Yes, yes.
It's Jubilees, release, it's victory, it's
Yes.
celebration.
Well, in actual fact, Victor and I got married 50 days after he fell in love with me. We got married on the 50th day after that, yes. Yes, 18th of March, 1:05, he will tell you, suddenly, opened his heart and he suddenly saw me and it was like, I said to him, go get her. And 2 hours later, we had announced on Facebook that we were both in relationships. Though most of our friends didn't know both of us because this all happened during lockdown. And 2 hours later, we then announced that we were actually engaged. And then we realised that Victor's birthday was 50 days later, so we decided, right, we'll get married on that day, on the 9th of March.
I just want to chime in, because this is really resonating with me, what you're saying here, because this is now connecting back to yesterday. When you talked about Ephesians chapter 4, you have to have the government in place.
Yes.
When you call it 4-4 ministry of fact, you have to have the governmental body in place. When the governmental body is in place, everything then flows from that. But the church doesn't want it. Well, I see the church doesn't want it.
The church doesn't want it, but also it tends to be that the assumption is made that you have those people who don't have the skills or the giftings of the fivefold ministry, give them the jobs of admin in the background. Whereas in actual fact, they need to be doing admin in line with Torah. They need to be well conversant with God's ways of doing things, not just because they happen to be good at shorthand typing. It's not a skill.
Government can't be based and operating of its own constitution. I come from an international organization that did that. They had their own replacement theology going on. It has to be by Torah.
It has to be.
That governmental body are bound together to operate under the constitution of Torah. Then every miracle can flow.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So this was what I was going to say. There were 5 loaves and 2 fish with the feeding of the 5,000. And the feeding of the 4,000, there were 7 loaves, and it just says several fish. Okay? So what I've written down here, the 5 loaves and 2 fish meant something in the Hebrew environment because they had the 5 books of Torah,
Yeah.
the fivefold book, as I talk about it,
Yeah.
the blueprint, but the 2 tablets of the law. Now, 5 plus 2 equals 7. Now, in Gentile circles, 7 is the number of the universe, since the 7th day brought completion and peace to the creation of God. Okay? Now, the fish are less important to the Gentiles. The bread was important, and it echoes the story of God supplying manna as they traveled through the wilderness. So it's sometimes you need to actually compare the 2 stories to get more depth out of it, rather than just saying, when you've been listening to God and listening to teaching all day, that he will supply. There was a much bigger story being revealed throughout all of this. Now, at the end, there were 12 basketfuls left over with the feeding of the 5,000, whereas there was only 7 basketfuls left over. But as I say, if 7 represents the completion of the universe and represents the entire universe, then we know that the 12 basketfuls left over represents the 12 disciples, but it also represents the 12 tribes. The 7 basketfuls left over represents that even whenever the 12 tribes and the lost sheep are fed, there will still be plenty for the entire universe.
Yes.
But you need to understand the 2 stories in sync
Yes.
together. Now, there's an interesting verse in Deuteronomy 7 verse 1. The promised land was, that should say occupied, not occupies. It was occupied by the 12 tribes of Israel and the competing 7 nations of Gentiles. So that's just a biblical reference if you're wanting more than me just saying the 7th day was the completion of all of creation.
Didn't you mention yesterday that there were 2 tribes, as we know, that didn't go, and so there weren't 12 tribes that occupied, am I right?
Yes, but also, yes, it's traditionally believed that 2 of the tribes stayed within the Holy Land, but a lot of them still went abroad as well.
It wasn't Canaan.
Some stayed, but some also left. They didn't all stay, but they felt their presence was still felt there, but there were still representatives of all 12 tribes were scattered throughout the entire world. Okay? But even without taking that argument, there's also the fact that there was still enough that Yeshua was bringing for all of the people within Israel.
There's always a
Yes,
remnant.
there's layer upon layer upon layer of
Always
truth
a
in it.
remnant that'll come
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
Even if they sneak in the back door.
Yeah. So whenever we have here, we've got John the Baptist was dead, and there was heightened expectation that his prophecy would be fulfilled. A descendant of David, the son, the seed of Jesse, would arise. And when Yeshua suddenly walks on the water, he revealed that he was the I Am, and that happened straight after they've had this amazing experience of feeding the 5,000. They come away, they've got baskets of bread, they're in the boat, and they're scared. They've forgotten already the power that he had, and it was there that he basically said, I am. So we've got here the 12 basketfuls. Now, an interesting thing that I forgot to mention is, why did they get food? Why did they have food? Now, with the feeding of the 5,000, it actually happened when? When did they get fed?
And what feast? I'm trying to understand.
Yes, well done, Stuart. Yes. It actually occurred as evening approached. Okay? However, the feeding of the 4,000, it didn't happen until 3 days later. Okay? Reason being, the disciples were concerned about the 5,000 people who were gathered there, just as I'm concerned about you lot, that we don't go too far past 1 o'clock and that you're all ravenous. But probably it's with me because I don't want you all getting hangry and throwing stuff at me. But with the 4,000,
Outside in the rain.
if you had food, you would hold on to it. You wouldn't be throwing it at me, would you? Now, with after 3 days with the 4,000, yes, it's significant that they were fed after 3 days, because after 3 days, when Yeshua rose, suddenly he was available to all. It could be that, but it's also interesting to notice that the disciples who were Jewish weren't really concerned about the Gentiles. They didn't care about the Gentiles the way they cared about their own people. and they let them go for 3 days. And if you actually read the text, it was Yeshua who was the one who felt compassion for the Gentiles.
You
Where-
often refer to Israel as Gentile.
Yes.
A lot.
They were
Yeah.
so
Yes,
hungry for
that's
the
right,
word.
yeah. But it was it's funny how the Jewish people and the disciples who were brought up with rabbis, they were concerned only really for their people on the doorstep, whereas Yeshua brings in another dimension completely with the feeding of the 4,000, that this is for more people than just the Jews. This is for the Gentiles, the lost sheep. This is for far more than that.
Just
Okay.
an important interjection is that bearing in mind with all of this, Yeshua only does what he hears the Father say,
Yes,
and he only speaks what he hears the Father speak.
yes,
So going back to the Syrophoenician woman, when he said about, I've come for the lost 12 tribes, when she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs, he heard his Father's voice in
yes,
that.
yes.
So he wasn't being hard.
No,
Get rid of her, she's just a dog.
yes,
That in that sense, but he can only operate by his Father. So when, like I said to Peter, flesh and blood has revealed this to you. So again, when that happened, like with the thief on the cross, he heard the voice of the Father, and then he responded and healed.
and it
Maybe it
was,
was our faith as well.
it was,
Yeah, but it was because of the Father.
Yes.
Because faith comes by hearing.
but it was,
hearing of the
it was,
word of the Father.
and it was exactly the same with the first miracle, because whenever Mary came to him and said, "They've got no wine," and he said, "But my time has not yet come," and yet almost straight
Moments
after
away,
that,
moments away.
yeah, he suddenly tells them to fill the vats with water.
Because he heard the Father.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it just
Exactly.
roots back to what you said earlier on. We don't know the mind of the ancient world.
Mhm.
But clearly from scripture, a lot of Gentile people, the woman, Roman centurion, they knew that blessings were coming from these people called
Yes.
Israelites.
Yes.
Forerunners.
And that statement that she made could only come from a woman that had great discernment to know that as a Gentile, we are blessed on account of you. And she comes seeking the Messiah. So she knew a lot of information
Mhm.
to go search him out when only he can deliver my child.
Yes.
Many other people had to revelate. We just don't know the mind of the ancient world.
Yeah.
The ancient peoples are not stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
They didn't watch TV and nonsense that we do. They listened, they taught, they had conversation. People traded, and through trade routes, the Bible says the Greeks were coming.
And they pick
To the
up
temple.
things. They pick up things, and some of them they embrace,
Yeah.
because it also means that they can hold a conversation and they can trade with them, and they're not seen as the enemy. Yeah. Yeah.
Even the Roman governor, Pilate, and the guy, the Roman centurion who was there when he was crucified.
Mm. Yeah. Right. Okay. It's 1 o'clock, and I think if you do some worship, and then after lunch,
Are
what?
you happy where you're stopping? Or you
I'm-
want to get to a safe?
No, I'm happy at this stage because I'm really wanted to set the scene of the fact that although Israel was chosen as God's people to show how a loving, redemptive Father keeps coming back to his people, it was only a kernel that was going to be burst forth into the whole world. What I'm going to do after lunch, because I want to keep it kind of light today, what I'll do after lunch is show you some English words that come from the Hebrew. I think you
Yeah.
might find that interesting,
Yeah.
and you'll see how it is filtered into our language.
It's a lot of English.